Hello. So today we are going to be discussing the first chakra, and then the first Sunday of every month, which is February through July, we will go through the chakras in order. So in other words, today we'll discuss chakra 1, and then the following Sunday, chakra 2, and so forth. And by the time we get to July, we will have covered all of the chakras. So I tried to advertise this as best as possible, but it looks like we don't have any viewers just yet. So however this goes, plenty of people can see it on the replay.
Mhm.
They can watch it on my YouTube channel, which is Julie Pershin, and they can also watch it on the Creators of New Earth Facebook page. And your YouTube channel name is
Snow Wellness.
Snow Wellness. Okay.
Mhm.
So
Right.
those are the three places where they could watch the replays. And so I like to start these live streams with a little invocation. And right before we got on here today, I was thinking about all the people who've ever lived on the planet who have taken up working with the chakras as part of their personal path to awakening. And I would like to invite all of those ancestors here to be with us, to presence and guide this discussion. And I would offer up that anybody who watches this now or on the replay invites whoever they would like to invite. In other words, different aspects of themselves, or different guides and guardians that they work with, or their higher self. And we always know that when you and I are talking, there are angelic presences, archangels, Mary Magdalene, Jesus, Mother Mary, and so forth with us.
Mhm. Yes.
So to acknowledge all of the beings that we've just mentioned from beginning until now, to be with us here, and to invite ourselves to really be present and grounded in this conversation, and that the most beneficial information and energies stream through us and the spirits that are present. And yeah, so that's my invocation and blessing for this conversation today.
Excellent.
As usual, I have to remember to turn this thing off so it doesn't cause us any problems. Power off. Okay. So, I've been interested in chakras since my late 20s.
Mhm.
I remember I bought a book called Wheels of Life.
Mm.
It's like
Yes.
the encyclopedia of chakras.
Absolutely.
But no matter, I mean, the chakras really are a lifelong study and practice.
Mhm.
And so in reviewing for today's discussion, I was reading different articles and reminding myself of information connected to the chakras, and learning new information along the way too. There's so much to unpack, so we'll see how much we can get through.
Indeed.
But I think there's a tendency, for me certainly, to collect information and then not put it into practice. And
Yeah.
I think that with spirituality in general, the human, which is so mind oriented, sometimes we place a lot more emphasis on our mind than maybe our body, or what's going on with us spiritually.
Yes.
And what I'm coming to realize, the longer I work with the chakras and the longer I am in a body, is that yes, of course, that we are spirit in a body, but this whole thing of wanting to remember who we are and inhabit and activate our rainbow body and evolve spiritually really comes down to the body and our biochemistry and our
Mhm.
physiology. And that's why I believe it's so important to work with the chakras.
Mhm.
So, um, I do want to cover everything from the, gross to the subtle, from the mundane to the esoteric. But I want to start by reminding the audience that so the chakras are energy centers or vortices, and each
Mhm.
chakra is associated with a bundle of nerve endings along the spine, where sensitivity and receptivity are highly concentrated. And each of these nerve clusters has a connection to a corresponding endocrine gland.
Excellent.
And um, those endocrine, okay, so when you stimulate those nerve, that causes the endocrine glands to release hormone chemicals in the body. And those nerve bundles are also nadis or subtle body channels. So there's
Mhm.
where there's a bundle of nerves, there is a confluence of channels, and those
Yeah.
channels circulate our prana through the body. So
Mhm.
in a very practical, physical way, that's a way to introduce and talk about the um, the chakras. And then, of course, there's a mental, physical, spiritual connection and component. But what we can think about, or what I think is very fascinating to think about, is when we have, so the chakras are the bridge between the mental and emotional body. I'm sorry, the physical and emotional body. Because when we have a strong feeling or a strong emotion that corresponds to one of these nerve bundles and thus to our endocrine system, then certain hormones are released from the body,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
that can create imbalance and mental instability and anxiety and fear and sadness and grief and anger and rage and all the emotions. So in the case of the first chakra,
Mhm.
um, if we are experiencing fear and we get into a fight or flight syndrome, um, the endocrine system um, gets activated, especially the adrenals, which are connected to the first chakra, and then that ties directly to adrenaline and cortisol. And as you've mentioned to me before in the past, some people have more of a uh, some people get more hopped up on adrenaline and some people get more
Mhm.
hopped up on cortisol. It's almost like they have a that's their chemical of choice, one or the other,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
um, so I wanted to state those things, and then I think it's interesting to note, um, you know, I imagine that people watching this either now or on the replay kind of know they can go through the chakra and they can think, oh, the color is red and the parts of the body are the back and the feet and the large intestine, and the planet is Mars, and uh, the frequency is 396, and the sound is Lam, and the note is C, and the emotions can be fear, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. So we have like this running list, but it's not really about having memorized all the associations. Um, it's about learning how those things are of importance to the first chakra. The last thing I
Mhm.
want to say before I turn it over to you, um, and I have some questions too, but the last
Yeah.
thing I want to say is that, we've discussed this in a previous live stream that we did together. But you know,
Hmm.
these chakras are vortices. So each chakra is a vortex, right? And
Hmm.
but they are also dimensions. And so I was reading an article by Sadhguru, and he was said that each chakra actually has two dimensions, the physical dimension and the spiritual dimension. I thought
Hmm.
that's worth talking about and looking into. And of course, I know that you have um, many ways of helping people work with the chakras, um, and because you know so much about essential oils, at some point, I would like you to address that. And also, you have it's been very helpful. You have a word for each chakra, and for the first
Hmm.
chakra, it's trust.
Hmm.
And Sadhguru, going back a little bit, when I read that article, you know, he was saying, and I was noticing this too when people write about the chakras. So there's this kind of programming. I don't know if it's in all of humanity, but it's definitely really predominant in our culture. This thing about hierarchy, you know,
Yeah.
we tend to associate the higher up something is, the more importance we give it, and the lower something is, the less importance we give it. And in the chakras, that is absolutely not the way it is. Because,
Hmm.
and you could even consider the first chakra, even though it's the lowest, to be the most important because it's foundational, right? And
Hmm.
so if we
Absolutely. Yeah.
think of our chakras like a house, and the first chakra is the foundation of the house, and the seventh chakra is the roof, well, the roof won't hold up unless
Hmm.
you've got good walls and a strong foundation. So,
Perfect.
you know, sometimes you read articles and people will just gloss over the root chakra and get more heavily into the other ones. And I think
Indeed.
that's, you know, really a grave mistake. And
Hmm.
the other thing that I just am thinking about, you know, right in this moment is that I think I mean, it'd be great in this lifetime to master all of them. But it
Hmm.
seems that depending on what's going on with our life, we're like, "Oh, this really seems like a first chakra, third chakra, sixth chakra, et cetera, kind of,
Hmm.
phase I'm going through or issue I'm dealing with, so I wanna work on that chakra now," you know?
Right.
And then, of course, they all interweave and overlap. And lately
Hmm.
I've been noticing the like, I almost can't separate the first and second chakras for how closely they are uh correlated, you know.
Hmm.
um if someone's just beginning to work with the chakras,
Yeah.
would you say that they should just, not just, but that it would be helpful to sort of learn to um master or really dive deep into the first chakra, and then once they feel they've got that one done, then go to the second and so forth? Or should they just start with whatever's going on in their life and go from there?
I totally agree with the latter. It's, that just meet yourself where you are. And we have been developing these chakras our whole lives. So, depending on where you're at in your own human development, that you are in a certain chakra and getting a sense of it, like, this, volume that we all use, this wheels of life. And right. So, using the context of these different teachers and this information, that's what I've done, and that's basically what I do in session too. Is when we start a session, and especially if somebody that I haven't met, that's one of the first questions I ask: what chakra are we working in? And I'll ask that question. That will give me some context to what guides we're working with, and like you
Mhm.
said, dimensional. And so each one of these dimensional portals of chakra is has a whole host of guides that basically occupy that space. And so that's how we can meet you. So, and all of my training, every single aspect of the training that I've had, the bottom line of each one of these is meet the person where they are. And so that's absolutely, the right direction is meet yourself where you are and be able to discern that in some way. Like I'm dealing with a relationship issue, and that basically puts me into my lower chakras mostly. And what aspect of relationship am I working with? And then how can I discern that as the knowledge that we're going to gain here of what each chakra just, and that was always my goal, basically to make it as simple as possible. This is a very complex system. And
Yeah.
so, so like you said, we could do hours and hours and hours and hours and still never even touch the surface basically of what these energy centers do, how they translate this thing that we call energy into a thing that we call chemistry. That's quite magical and beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was reading something earlier about the first chakra being related to innocence and this like pure childlike joy. And
Mhm.
I've been working with my first and second chakras lately.
Mhm.
Um, and excuse me, my cat wants to go out. And I've also, you know, been noticing that as a person, and I don't think, well, I shouldn't say as a person. I think everybody's in their core, they are innocent and pure and childlike. We all have those qualities.
Mhm.
But for me personally, it's been so long now that I've been going through one major transformation after another, and digging deep in the mud, and taking on difficult tasks, etc. And it's really dampened my joy. And I would like to access more of my own pure childlike joy. And in other words, I find myself, I'm lightening up. I've noticed in the past week or so, I'm lightening up, but I'm too serious, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like, that's the whole thing. Part of enlightenment is that lightness, a lightness
Mhm.
of being. So, well, but do you agree? So, how does the first chakra and why does the first chakra connect to innocence and pure childlike joy?
I would say that just from that standpoint, that this is where we start. And so this is a starting place. So developmentally, so between the ages of 0 or even in the womb into about 4 years old, developmentally, that is root chakra development. And so, and when we look at it as the pairing of chakras, this is one of the things I do in the meditation I do is pair them as root and crown. And so thinking in those terms, we're not necessarily developing all the way up to this crown chakra. We're actually coming in with a crown chakra development and a root chakra development. And so that's kind of interesting to think about when you look at a baby and it's not able to communicate verbally with us, but all the ways that it can communicate, these big eyes and this looking around and right. So it's assessing essentially safety, right? So it's absolutely a major component of that root chakra. And then this big connectivity that we often see in these infants. Like, what are they seeing? They're seeing something that I've either filtered out or maybe I did see as an infant, but it's really interesting to come back into that space and say, this circular, this figure eight pattern that connects the crown and the root is happening as you are developing in these very young ages. So part of that joy is connecting to the safety of these people that you're coming into. And then this big metaphysical world, angels, guides, and the even bigger spiritual world of oneness, connection, and source. And so I think that really gives us that context of that root chakra, that energy from that connectivity is coming into the root and then feeding back up to the crown. And we're always in, this heart centered connectivity that is allowing that connection to be connecting as above, so below. And so I think that to me, right off the bat, is really important as this place where I'm supported. So I feel supported by the physical world. I am cared for, taken care of, and I am feeling supported by the metaphysical and spiritual world. And so that's, something that doesn't really drop away until probably that second level of development. So we think of the most dependent we are, the more in the root chakra we are. And so that definitely touches into these things that we've talked about, you know, this is a vortex of energy, this is connectivity, this creates a chemistry, this is the development of this gender that we are is happening in that root chakra. And so this identity that we come in with, these parts that we come in with, and how we express this in our childhood, and how we develop a sense of self in comparison to, first of all, just ourselves in that root chakra, then in our community. And so, yeah, so I think that what we're talking about this kind of pure joy, where we don't have the responsibilities of adulthood, we don't have the worries and the transition of that kind of middle codependent stage. So we're in this dependent stage, and this really is kind of a beautiful space. And we actually think, if we think of the container of life, we end up there too. So we come in as dependent, and we usually leave as somewhat dependent. As so that's also interesting.
What were you saying about, I don't think I quite caught it. So you talked about something like, you said we're not, I, I didn't catch it, so I can't really even reiterate it. But you talked about coming in with the first and seventh chakras kind of already turned on. Is that what you were saying? You said it's not like we're
Mhm,
developing them, they are developed.
mhm. Well,
So,
I think that, yeah, we develop them too, but I mean, that's the first ones that we inhabit. I think that would be a good way to say.
oh, okay, okay,
Yeah. Mhm,
okay. And as far as like spiritual guides, archangels,
mhm.
etc., what do you associate with which guides do you associate with the first chakra?
Yeah, so the first one is the elementals. That's what I call it. And so that's why a lot of times when I have a first session with somebody, I'll talk about creating an altar and really starting to focus on the elemental world, this world that we live in. So water, fire, air, and air, right? So this, I think I said that twice. Ta-da!
Water, fire, earth, air.
Eh,
Earth. Yeah,
Earth, air,
earth
right?
is first chakra,
Earth,
right? Earth
right?
element.
And so this is the way to say that the root chakra encompasses all of those elementals. And so it does. And then we think of our connection to Earth as this connection to this thing, this ball that we're flying around space. This thing is Earth, and so our connectivity through hips, legs, and feet. And so our connection in that way, always meditation and all the system, the yogic system, basically, of the movement of this lower body as it connects to the earth, the sits bones and meditation, all 4 points of the feet when we're connecting in a yoga pose. And so this connection to earth is definitely happening in that root chakra. And then thinking of that earth as our mother, then we can really put it in the context that the third chakra actually is occupied by the divine mother, or the mother earth. This is our emotional self. The root chakra basically is this connection to this mother that provides everything that we need. And so the root chakra has that really important element of, these are the needs. So the needs basically are the basic needs of human: water, food, so these needs basically shelter, community, as we come in as dependent creatures, that we need those things. And when those things are met, we feel a greater sense of safety. And if they're not, if we are abandoned, if we're alone, if we're right in these really critical developmental stages, then we really will carry that as an attachment into our adult lives. And so that's why this rootedness of the attachment or the negativa of that chakra is pride. But we also have pride as a very positive word, that, I'm prideful in myself and my doingness in the world and my community and my family and my faith. All of these things create a sense of pride, and then that pride will go deeper, deeper, deeper into that world where then that's all there is. And so that's one of the negativa expressions of the root chakra as well, is if it is only that, if I only have my family, my this, my that, and those are the only things that are right, then and I bring that into adulthood, that pride is the deadly sin of pride, where I don't have this expansion into my trust, like we mentioned earlier. So the trust being the grace, and trust being this place of I trust that there's a metaphysical world and there's guides that want to help me. And so right in that realm, the elements are one of the first things to reach out to for help. So that water and earth. And so I'm basically growing food in the earth and I'm watering it. So we can really see that connectivity as being really critical. The shelters are made out of earth always, and that I have to breathe air in order to live. And so when we really get that sense of these are the elements, and then the elementals basically are, it's really a host, right? It's the fey realm, it's the right. So there is many realms of elementals that as children, as very young children, we're actually able to see. And as we come out of that kind of magical child space, those things kind of drop away. We kind of put some filters up for that, but they're all there for sure, which is really also fascinating to me.
So fire, earth, water, air. So, um, like fairies, what element do you associate them with? Earth or air?
I think, well, they're all of them basically because they live in the elemental world, and so they interact with all of those elements. And so we can get into a place where there would be a primary. So that's also true. But in this way, just thinking of them as this is part of this Mother Earth and the operation of it and the metaphysical part of that. So we can see the physical part, as adults, but we don't often see this metaphysical component, how these elements are interacting with each other, and how we as humans are actually interacting with the elemental world in either a positive or a negative way. I think there's, probably a lot of both, but probably more negative in the world that we currently live in.
So there are creatures which certain people think are mythological, but
Hmm.
other people have direct connection to them and know that they're not mythological, like unicorns and dragons, for
Yeah,
instance. Would you
definitely.
call these elementals?
Absolutely, yeah. So they're part of this Earth experience. That's one of the things that I like about the animal totems is Dragonfly is one of the major characters in the animal totem world, and Dragonfly, according to this guidance, right? So this gets into me getting guidance from these guides. That the story of Dragonfly is actually quite fascinating, but as it's delivered to me, dragons, these mythological, big, huge creatures that flew much like dinosaurs. And so they were flying dinosaurs and they were big. I don't get any guidance that they actually breathed fire, but I think um, they did some damage for sure. And so here from a developmental standpoint of how long the Earth's been around and these different creatures have inhabited this Earth, there was some interaction with actual dragons and humans, but dragons became dragonflies. And so that's really an interesting thought that here's this insect that when you think about dragonfly, it doesn't really fit the category of insect a lot of times. It's like we're not really interacting with it. We're not shooing it away usually. As far as I know, it doesn't bite. I think it may have the ability to do that, but I've never been bitten by one. And so, right. So they're not like mosquitoes or some of these other, insects in the insect world, which is also elemental, where we have a problem with them. So it's like here we don't have a problem with them, whereas when they were big dinosaur creatures, we did. We were
Mhm,
having trouble living as humans and
mhm.
dragons. We have a whole mythology about slaying dragons and how you become a hero in doing that. And this is kind of interesting. We're always talking about the hero's journey as well. So so this again, just in that little piece is just so much content that we can kind of take that deep dive into and say that most people don't. And I think you're right about that, that there is a lot of mythological information about these characters, people that live inside the earth, and so that there's humanoid creatures that live in the earth, and that there are trolls, and there are, right, so all these names that we kind of sound familiar to us, and how they actually exist in this non-physical reality, this reality that is happening kind of around us, but not in our sense perception.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about, like, you know, if a person walked around, telling everybody, like, oh, I see dragons, and, my best friend is a unicorn, and I see fairies and
Mhm.
elves
Yeah.
and all of these things, you know, if they are not careful about what circles they share that with, they could get locked
Yeah.
away, right?
Absolutely.
And,
Totally. Yeah.
but I also think so. There's something to be said for the pace we go at with
Mhm.
our spiritual growth, what we interact with, um, how much we understand. Like, if we already know, if we're privy to certain information and we're grounded, then if we see a unicorn appear in front of us, we can be fine with that.
Mhm.
Other
Yeah.
people might freak out and be like, oh my God, I'm hallucinating. I must be schizophrenic. La da 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 da.
All true. Yes. Yeah. I definitely think that that's important to note, is that this magical, mythical, metaphysical world, right, we do have the ability as humans to interact with that world, actually in a sense experience. So many people have built that sense, or they have a better sense of it, or they have not the filters that we develop as children to kind of start filtering that stuff out of our vision. And so, yeah, so I definitely think that always when someone comes to me, that's the curiosity and the question. Like, I'll get, like, I saw this, or I had this kind of experience, or this seemed like a dream, but maybe it was not a dream. And that's how we can discern it. And I'm always kind of trying to bring it into a world of, how's it helpful? How does that help us? Right. So the unicorn, and what does that mean? And how does that represent? And can we get a meaning from that that basically can help us in our physical lives?
Mhm. Yeah. So, okay, we're talking about like spiritual guides in the first chakra. Then
Hmm.
we said it's the elementals, and
Hmm.
in a very practical, physical way. In that, you know, we need um, food to survive. We need to be drinking water in order to survive. We breathe air. That's an element. The earth provides us with everything we need. Then fire. How do you incorporate
Hmm.
that one?
Yeah, it's critical, right? I mean, I definitely, so it's winter here, and we absolutely need either fire or some substance of that, right? So I've got a heater that's basically burning natural gas that will ignite into a flame that will heat air that heats this house. So it's not much different than it was. I have a fireplace behind me, actually, that I put, cedar wood in, and it will warm this room and probably a couple other rooms, and its way of doing that. So living with fire in a cave, in nature, it is a critical component to life. As far as, I have done that through a rite of passage, where if you don't have fire, it's incredibly uncomfortable, and it also is something that cannot sustain life for very long.
And I mean, I know as it applies to Chinese medicine, like,
Hmm.
um, but the fire in our body, how do you think
Hmm.
of that?
Oh, absolutely, right. It's. I mean, I'm doing a lot of work on myself as far as digestion and metabolism, which is all about fire. And so, like, we start getting into this, like, how much fire do I have in my stomach, basically, as stomach acid that can actually break down and digest food, and how detrimental that is if that's not happening. And so we can definitely see it in those terms. We see it in just the polarity of, basically, is something hot or cold. And so, we also use it in that way, like you're saying, in the yin and yang of, Chinese medicine, and the Ayurvedic, same, right? Things are pitta, they're hot, And so, from that standpoint, that's why these systems I think work really well together. That, just having a basic knowledge of, Chinese medicine as it applies to what we're talking about here, the polarity, and the Ayurvedic as it applies to these different styles of being a human, and how we may have an original style, a pitta style. That's actually what my original dosha is.
Me too.
And right. And so, but this body that I'm living in is very kapha. And so, like, I'm, you know, coughing before we get on, and I'm drinking some lemon water right at the moment and trying to not drink as many cold drinks. And so I'm living in a kapha body, but my basic nature is very much more fiery. I'm a Sagittarius, right? So we bring that whole world into it. I'm a fire element, and it definitely shows up. And so I think that's where every one of these systems that we look at also has elemental as a basic part of it. The tarot, critical in the element world,
Hmm.
right? So also true. So my astrology, the tarot, just the basic polarity of running a pendulum and talking to guides. So yeah, I definitely think that it's really important from that standpoint of, that we just continue to tap into the simplicity of this thing we're living in, and how we roll it back into this root chakra, red, right?
I
So
know, I caught that. That's great that you were red today.
yeah, so just honoring that and kind of delivering that message of what red feels like, right? It can be incredibly activating. And so this is fire, right? So it can have, so if I'm agitated and I tune into this podcast and I'm looking at this red shirt the whole time, that could actually make me more agitated. And so it actually does make a huge difference in our lives.
Mm. Um, I'm just trying to think of where to go
Yeah.
next. Okay. So one of the emotions when you have imbalance in your first chakra, or your first chakra
Mhm.
takes a hit, or you take a hit, like maybe an event happens, and like it can be sudden, or it could be a life condition, and fear wells up inside of you,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden that nerve bundle gets excited, and then it stimulates the adrenal glands, and now all of a sudden you have adrenaline running through your body, and you're experiencing all of this fear. What
Hmm.
are some things that you can do? Please include the essential oil. What are some
Oh yeah.
things that you can do to um, get yourself out of that loop where the nerve bundle is being excited, and then it's sending a message to the adrenals to excrete adrenaline? And
Hmm.
then even when you're not in that necessarily right in the midst of
Yeah.
fight or flight, but you're walking around going, oh my God, how am I going to pay my rent? And maybe that is with you for like 3 weeks. And so
Yeah.
you've got this constant, underlying stream of fear
Hmm.
running in your mind and in your body.
Yeah. Totally.
How can you work with that directly?
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start as far as basic needs. So, we're living in a time right now that is inflationary, and basic needs are a little more challenging to acquire. And so, like, here I'm drinking water out of my little cup here, and saying that, this is an important thing. This water has to come through a system, right? So I do need a tribe essentially of people that can help me to meet my basic needs. And if I am in fact worried that I won't be able to pay the rent, then that worry, fear, right? Because there's levels of all of these emotions. And so we can call it worry, but it really is foundational in that root chakra as fear. I am afraid that I won't be able to meet the needs that I need as a human. And what will happen then? So that's that kind of, do I have enough of a tribe to basically create enough safety for me that I can know that I will be taken care of? And that's why in the physical, that's really critical. In the work that I do with people, it's even more important to know that I have metaphysical or angelic elemental guides, help, that I can turn to, even in the case of rent, and say, how am I either blocking this, or how is the world doing that? How am I believing something that is coming into this place? And so, how is this all occurring? And that's all the chakras connecting, but it's landing basically in this root chakra and this me as a human in the world. And so, we don't get to that place very often. That's why I recommend meditation as a practice, even if you're not good at it. So I really think that that's important to note, that if you're not good at it, then you're a practitioner just like the rest of us, and you're just at a certain level of meditation. And the willingness to continue to work in that way, to create a space, create an altar, sit in that space, not for very long, 5, 10 minutes, to be able to breathe and focus on the breath, and then come into and use some of these other tools like you're talking about, as far as like the oil, like the essential oil that I'm guided that reduces fear is copaiba. And so copaiba is not kind of the typical one that when you go to the store and look at the list of them, but it is a very powerful essential oil that does hold the intention of reducing fear. And even in this way, simply the root chakra, vetiver. So vetiver is a very earthy grounding oil too, right? So that's super helpful.
It's interesting because I, before I started delving into this, the strand of DNA that I'm working on right now, and
Yeah.
realizing like, oh, this is first and second chakra stuff. I had been really wanting to smell vetiver, and so I've been putting it in um, uh, my diffuser. But that was even before I started working. It was like a little foreshadowing. And
Perfect.
the fact that I was craving it too, craving that smell.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know, some people say copaiba, some people say copaiba. Either way
Yep.
you say it, the spelling is, if in case you want to order some,
Yeah.
is Copaiba. And just as a little extra helpful piece of information, um, copaiba or copaiba is also helpful in some of your like any oils or lotions or whatever that you put on your on your face. It can get rid of like little brown spots or liver spots or age spots, or like if you have a little like not really exactly a skin tag, but something that might speak of a little bit of fungus or whatever. You can put it repeatedly on those, or other places in your body too. You might take whatever product you have. If you use it frequently, like maybe you have a little bit of face cream or you have some oil,
Mhm.
you might take a few drops of copaiba and put it in there, and then
Beautiful.
just put that on the areas that you're working with. Can be very helpful. You'll watch it dissipate if you do it a couple times a day for a few weeks. So just wanted to add
Excellent.
that because I think it's helpful.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And it does have meaning too, because this is a little different than the typical Chinese medicine, where typical Chinese medicine, the liver is anger, where consistently my guidance is that the liver is fear, and actually kidney is anger. And so I know that in the duality of how that works, that will make sense to people who really understand that system. But that also gives credence to that this oil, in its relationship to reducing fear, fear shows up on our skin, and that is how it shows up. As it works on the liver. It actually hurts the liver, fear does, and so the liver becomes less functional, and that's how it shows up. So I think your
Mm,
point on that is great.
mm, Yeah, because as trained in Chinese medicine and
Hmm.
practice acupuncture and all that, I still am like,
Yeah.
because the liver, they say the liver is responsible for I mean, you could say the liver is connected to all the emotions because
Oh
its
yeah.
its nickname is the free and easy wanderer.
Yeah.
So it's like it's responsible for the smooth and easy flow of energy and emotions, right?
Right.
And
Right.
but it's also interesting. I mean, kidneys have a relationship to the first chakra, don't they?
They do, right? So in
right?
this
It's
realm,
your
we'll talk more about kidneys in
adrenals.
a second. Yeah. So we'll talk more about that the ganglion nerve bundle connecting into the adrenals as a second chakra thing, but in the gonads and the whole sexual center is connected to the root. And
Yeah.
so that's where this, the primary estrogen, progesterone, testosterone is. So those are the chemicals coming out of that root chakra.
And adrenaline and cortisol.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you get into that understanding like you have of all the interconnectedness of these things. So a lot of times to pull it apart in a way that we can understand it is really
Right.
hard.
Because it's not, yeah, it's not all, yeah, it's kind of like saying, I was trying to think of a good analogy, but it's like some things that are on the first floor also show up on the second floor and the third floor. So you're going to find,
It- yes, totally.
yeah, they're all intertwined. There's just no simple way to put it except that they're all
Yeah,
intertwined. I
absolutely.
wanted to give a shout out if you're still watching Creative Knowledge TV. You put a little comment up here that says peace. We're happy to have you here if you're still watching. And if you're not, well, thank you for being here when you were. Um,
Absolutely.
I feel like when we've talked before, oh gosh, Julie, pick a lane. I'm like, archangels or chakras and dimensions, archangels or
Mm,
chakras and dimensions. So um, I thought it was interesting when I was reading that article by Sadhguru, where he was saying that chakras have a physical and a spiritual dimension. And it's interesting. He was saying the physical dimension is kind of like your physical house.
hmm Yeah.
And it's where you do, like all your mundane stuff. And, you got to clean the house and now you got to cook and take care of all these tasks and whatever.
hmm
And
Yeah.
then he talked about the spiritual dimension of the chakra as like your vacation home. And he's
Mm,
like, your vacation home in some ways is, well, it's more fun to be there because you're not there all the time and
truth.
it's not mundane.
Yes.
But it's also can be a little more challenging than being in your everyday home because it's not set up the same to, for your like
Yeah.
everyday needs or whatever. And it takes, it's like you got to get in your car and go there. And, so he was just, making all these analogies. But how do you speak to chakras and as dimensions? And since we're focusing on first chakra today, what
Yeah.
dimension do you correlate that with?
Yeah, I think this is really helpful as far as, this idea that okay, it's a center, it's an energy center, it has an intake, and like all toroidal fields, so the toroidal field has an intake from both directions into the center. So the whole system of the chakra system is both directions into the center as the heart. And then this is where I started feeling this in my Reiki training. I would feel a difference between the heart itself, that chakra, and these other chakras. And so I started saying, like, it seems to me that the heart isn't a chakra, that basically it's something else, and I don't understand what that is. And so that has a very interesting component to it as well. And then when we put it in the context of the system that we're in, it definitely has a physical body, the heart chakra. It's running a very specific thing. And so, and then when we understand how all of this energy can come into the heart and then leave from the heart, go out into metaphysical and spiritual. So I always break those two things into two components.
What two
So
things
that
are the two
so
components?
so spiritual would be the non-dual.
Okay.
So and then metaphysical would be the first expression of duality. And then this physical reality would be the second expression of duality.
Oh,
And so that the duality, that's how characters can exist. I'm a character. Michael is a character, right? So Archangel Michael is a character, Christ, light, right? All these things that come out of the non dual, they first enter into the metaphysical. I call that a soul, right? So I think my soul actually exists metaphysically. My chakras exist metaphysically. So emotion is a metaphysical thing. It's not physical. It certainly shows up when I'm angry as physical, right?
Mhm.
But it isn't in its pure sense a physical, tangible thing that I can hold. And so that's this translator that basically is always working in that way. So this root chakra has the ability to translate this elemental world, just keeping it very simple, into a chakra system and into a body that basically is made of elements, so that we can, definitely see that in the five element theory and the four element theory, right? So when we are working with elements, this is what we're working with, is the translator of. And so it's taking something that is not physical, also fear, right? Not physical, bringing it into a chemistry like we're talking about, like adrenaline. And then we're using that chemistry to move us in a direction based on that. So that's this simplicity of, how does this occur? Lion running at me. There's a mechanism that basically is already in place that says fear activated all this chemistry into my limbs, run away. And then the other aspect of that would be peaceful group, safe home, relaxation, into sleep. Sleep is a huge component of the root chakra as well. And so, this is an interesting way that we think of, we cannot truly sleep in a deep sleep unless we are safe. And so that safety that the root chakra allows us to have moves through our entire system and makes the right chemistries and does all those things that will allow us to sleep. And we all know that if we don't sleep, that has a lot of repercussions that are not helpful.
So, dimensions. So, what dimension would you say first chakra is associated with?
It's an interesting question, dimensions, right? I think that the chakras are dimensions. And so if we just say that we have seven of them, then that's seven dimensions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the most basic way to think about it, that it's the first dimension of this dimensional self that I am. And so we can kind of look at that as how we think of dimension from a scientific standpoint, that there is, like, I always kind of use my bookcase as an example of that, right? It has this dimensionality that I can see, that it has height and width and depth, three dimensions. And so if we think of these lower three chakras as height, width, and depth, that might be a good way to think about it. That,
Mhm.
this is the bookcase, the lattice work basically that creates this physical being that I am. And so thinking of it as, this is how we understand dimensions, that we start with a dimension and build it into two and then build it into three. That kind of takes it out of this metaphysical or a new age thought of, there's millions of dimensions. And right, because I mean, certainly when we talk about past life, we're talking about dimension. So I think of them as bubbles, basically, just these bubbles, dimensional bubbles, and they're all existing together somehow. And so there's how many Kevins out there basically playing out that human or not human life, right? It gets big
Mhm.
really fast when we start talking about dimensions. So I always kind of bring it back into, these dimensions are basically the way that we live these human lives. That I'm living in a house, it has dimensions. And that if I can put it in that context first, then I can start understanding when somebody says this is a fifth dimensional issue or this is a 12th dimensional issue. If we put it in the context of, I have bubbles of dimensions that are called chakras, then, and they're all kind of working together, that's just a way to basically simplify and make sense of this whole system that we live in.
Mhm. Um, I was thinking about something.
Yeah.
Well, so you have your physical body, which you can
Mhm.
see, and if we're talking layers, right? So it goes
Mhm.
physical body,
Mhm.
emotional body, mental body, spirit body, etheric body, right? Is that
Yeah,
right?
these I use a little
And then
different words for that, but I think that definitely the concept is the same for sure.
and then
So,
after
mhm,
etheric, would you say,
astral.
astral and then causal?
Yeah, so I definitely think that, if we put it in this, so these words that we're using, that one of the things that the root chakra is sub-physical. So if we think of it as elemental, it's also microbiome. It's all of this microbiome that basically runs this thing that we live in, and that is predominantly fungus and bacteria.
Oh, that's
And so,
interesting because it
yeah.
is associated with the large intestine, microbiome.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. So this is really this critical component of this lower self that is usually out of our awareness unless we have an issue. And so, but when we have an issue with it, then it's not out of our awareness, and it's definitely in our awareness in a lot of the teaching that's happening right now about metabolism and how we live a healthy life. And so I think that root thinking of that root chakra as the dimensionality of our microbiome is helpful too.
Wow. And that's so interesting too, because although I haven't really heard anybody else say it other than you, um, I really took it to heart and it resonated right away. Is that,
Mhm.
you know, the coronavirus has a fungal
Yes,
component to it. And if coronavirus has done nothing else, it's caused a huge blow to our first chakra,
absolutely. Yeah.
right?
Huge,
I
right?
mean, just
So
that alone
uh,
could be a whole hour conversation, but
it totally can. I mean, just talk about safety and feeling unsafe in the world and going out into the world and right. So that all is absolutely tied into that.
mhm. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a blow to our foundation.
Yes.
Um, so in the oh gosh, it's
Yeah.
12:58. Okay. Let me think of my most impressing questions. Well, let's before we go, I mean, I did want to talk about archangels, but maybe we can work that in here some way. So we
it,
started
it
off.
might be nice to do it next time because definitely that's the realm, the dimensional realm of the second chakra is
Okay, great.
angels, archangels
Great.
specifically. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's try to do this.
Hmm.
We are logical creatures and we are linear creatures. And we
Absolutely.
started off talking about this in a very practical way, and then we branched off to some more
Mhm.
practical and less practical things. I would like the audience to be able to walk away or maybe replay this video if they're like, I'm
Yeah.
definitely having a first chakra issue right now, or I want to build and strengthen my first chakra, bring some balance to it, whatever that is. And I want some simple and practical ways of things that I can do to bring balance to that chakra. Maybe
Beautiful.
it's singing in the key of C, or singing the
Sure.
note C, or
Yeah.
saying the
Right.
sound Lam, or putting some red around your house, or
Hmm.
playing a binaural beat at 396 hertz, or
Hmm.
whatever that is. Can you give them a nice little package or bundle of things that
Yeah.
they can
Totally.
do to make that happen?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the voicing, I think, is important, like you mentioned earlier, that sound of alarm, and the mantra that I usually recommend for root chakra is the Ganesha mantra, Ganesha. And so that is Om Gum Ganapataye Namaha. And so that's you've just learned Sanskrit if you don't know that mantra. And so right, and that's how Sanskrit is taught is through sound. And so if you follow along with us, Om
Om
Gum
Om
Ganapataye
Ganapataye
Namaha.
Namaha.
And so that can connect us to Mother, to Earth, basic, really basic sits bones. So putting your butt down on the earth, on a rock that's comfortable, right? So touching soil, feet, the soles of the feet into the earth, wet grass is perfect. It's very helpful. So stepping the feet into wet sand or wet grass where that water can translate between you and it.
I have so much wet grass in my front yard.
Excellent, right? So it's just a really grounding, right? Smelling the vetiver, smelling the copaiba, doing these things. So when you put this together into a practice, it is, I began my day with something like this. So can I step outside my front door into wet grass? Can I smell this essential oil? Can I set up this altar that we're talking about? Can I put clear space and just put the basic elements on that altar? And then begin to interact with that on a daily basis and make that a ritual. I'm all about ritual. And so basically, what are the rituals that we can do? Can we put a piece of red jasper on that altar? Right? That's a
Or
very root
ruby.
chakra. Or ruby, right? So yeah, so absolutely. So raw ruby or polished ruby, right?
Or
Something that
garnet.
has garnet, absolutely. There's many different stones that have this color in them. And this color is really important. Can I look at this color? Can I imagine it in my mind's eye? Can I just take a deep breath in this moment and imagine that color red? And then I can imagine that red with my exhale going out into this space and then bringing it back in. And then we touch into basically this foundational element of family. Do I have a safe family? Have I experienced deep wounding trauma from my family system that I need to find a new family? Can I touch into this family of guides and angels and helpers that can be my new family, that can create a level of trust that I don't have in humans, where I haven't developed a sense of trust because I have an attachment disorder? And then I can bring this into my life today, as there is plenty of other options to bring it in. And so that's really, the way that I teach this. Also, like we just said, the sub physical or the microbiome. Can I do a prebiotic or a probiotic or right? So can I enter that into my world where I am practicing that I do a setup. So I do aloe vera juice first thing in the morning, just an ounce of it,
Mm.
right? That's my root chakra. That manages my lower self, my intestines, the bowels, the right. All of that is nourished by that aloe vera. And so that is a very root chakra thing to do.
Um, Thank you. All of those were very helpful. When we get off of here, I'm gonna fast forward to this part and take notes. Um, it's interesting too because I'm very intuitive with food, and so I've been
Mhm.
like asking my body like what it wants lately, and then I've been having some intestinal stuff.
Mhm.
And, interesting too for my 2023 forecast for Leo, it says there's going to be intestinal stuff. Anyways,
Oh,
it's
okay.
just so awesome to see how if you pay attention to your life, the issues that are coming up, just in your physical reality, and then what's going on with your physical body, and you
Mhm.
follow those threads, it will lead you to the chakra you need to work with. But,
It absolutely
and
will.
sometimes because I'm already like in the flow of this, sometimes I start doing things and I don't realize till later when I make a very conscious choice, like I'm going to work with my first chakra. And it's like, well, you already you've been eating these foods and you've been,
Perfect.
working with this oil and you've been, so it's just so exciting to think about and notice. But there was something. Uh, can you give me 1 second because I don't want to close in a hurry, but I have a
Yeah,
need to do something. Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, I can do a little riff here while you're out taking
Yeah,
notes.
cool. Thank you.
Right? so so yeah, definitely, kind of expanding on what we're talking about with that root chakra, and say that, that this setting up an altar and setting up a way of living, I think, is really critical. And this is the way that we're doing this as we're young infants, as we move from that dependent into codependent phase. We're doing a little class on these steps that can help us to come out of denial and into awareness, and then move from awareness into these deeper levels of awareness, which also match up with this chakra system. And so that we come out of thinking of, like, I don't often think of the sub-physical body or this microbiome, and that can be this place of denial, right? So it doesn't sound like those words match up, but I'm just unaware of it. It's happening, and I'm really happening outside of my awareness. And so as it comes into awareness into my physical body in the second chakra, that's what we'll do next. We can come into this place of these levels of understanding that can help us, and they can help us to become more aware and less in denial, or unawareness really is probably a better word for that. And so that we're going to do this little class, and we're going to tune in on Zoom and kind of do something similar here, where I'll riff for 20 minutes or so on what I think awareness is, and then we'll drop into a deeper exploration of that, and can have question and answer, that kind of stuff. So if anyone out there listening or listening on the recording that's interested in that, these also will be recorded, the thing that we're going to do. So but yeah, check in here. We'll be doing that work together as well.
Will you email me a Zoom link so I can join on Wednesday? Thank
Absolutely.
you. Yeah, I've been thinking about my altar lately because I have it on top of a bureau, and the bureau is pretty high. So it's
Mhm,
one thing if I want to go there and make an offering or stand there for a second,
mhm,
but I'm not, because it's so high up, I'm not interacting with it a lot. So
mhm,
before I got rid of all my possessions, I used to have this little TV tray. And sometimes I
mhm.
would put, like, one of my favorite textiles on it and just have it
Nice.
low to the ground, and something I can interact with where I'm meditating. And so I'm thinking that might be something I need to do. It's fine to keep that altar, but I need to
Mhm.
set up something that's lower to the ground that I can interact with while
Absolutely.
I'm meditating.
It happens this way. You kind of look around your house, you'll see there's altars that you set up like everywhere. Like you'll do things in different areas, and they'll have, usually the thing it doesn't have on it is water, right? It usually will have something representative of earth for sure, crystals,
Yeah,
stones, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And so look around the house and see where you've got stuff, and then I definitely do that same thing. It's a meditation bench and a meditation table that's about that height as well. So that's the space that I'm in.
yeah.
And so I'll enter into that space in the morning, and just make that transition from sleep into, right, my feet hitting the floor and my day starting. And so, and again, I really want to emphasize, not, doesn't have to be a long time, just as long as you visit it, just as long as you move some stuff on the altar and change the water out and say, oh wow, look, it's been a couple of days and the water's all gone. So I think this is really helpful from an altar standpoint. But that's also root chakra. That it is very root chakra to connect into an altar, just one letter different than altering yourself.
Yeah,
Right? And so it's a really important practice that I really recommend.
yeah. Hmm. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just looking at my questions here, and I don't know, maybe we can incorporate it somehow next time.
Yeah, definitely.
I wanted to talk about how trauma affects the first chakra, but next time we'll be talking about
Mm.
the second chakra. So,
Which is a great place to talk about trauma for sure.
okay, good.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
then, yeah, I think it's helpful to know with all the chakras, like how you notice when it's healthy, or how do you notice when
Mhm.
it's imbalanced, and imbalance can be overactive or underactive. So
Yeah.
um
Yeah, I put it in the context of those words too, where we can think of it as it translates into, am I too trusting? Am I trusting, or am I too trusting? Or am I prideful, or am I too prideful? So we can put it in that context of life and say, where do I fit on that scale? And
mhm,
then we can say what aspect I'm in, the positive or negative of that chakra. And the goal is to be here, 3% on either side of those words, that I
mhm,
have a slight bit of pride and a little bit of trust. And that's basically where I can comfortably live in that chakra. And they're all like that. So as we go through this, we'll talk about the different words for each one. But it's another good way that I use to kind of tap into, where do I need to focus?
mhm. Yeah. Well, and also if you're like, I'm imagining if you're like, you know, if your finances aren't squared away, if your
Mhm.
basic needs aren't met, or if you have fears about your basic needs,
Perfect. Yeah.
or fears around money or money problems or anything to do with basic needs, or you're questioning like, hey, I want to redo my life, sort of like change my,
Right.
like I did last year, got rid of a bunch
Mhm.
of material possessions, started
Absolutely.
reworking my financial life, all of that.
Excellent. Yeah,
That's
I totally agree. Yeah, this is what I did for my New Year earring. And
yeah,
this tunes me
nice.
in more to my tribe, my family tribe, and it really did this thing where I got this guidance for this year. Change something. Change something about yourself. And this is what the start of that change. And so,
Wow.
and also helping me to be more of the teacher in the world that you're allowing me to be here today. And so
Yeah.
that is also part of that. So that's definitely good stuff.
Yeah. So, everybody, I've sure enjoyed this time, and I hope that you have too, whether you are watching live or on the replay. And just to reiterate, Kevin and I will be on here the first Sunday of every month, February through July, and we will work our way through the chakras. So, next week we'll start with the second chakra, and by July we will have reached the seventh chakra. And
Awesome.
you know e- um speaking of pride, don't be too proud. Even if you watch this once, you might want to watch it again. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's helpful to just listen and absorb the information. Maybe the next time around, stop, take notes, write things down, however you do that. And um and and keep working with this video until you feel like you really have the first chakra down pat. And I think what we're going to try to do in the future is leave a little time at the end for a question and answer format with the audience to interact with
Great.
us. So if you
Excellent.
have any questions about the first chakra that didn't get answered today, we could answer those at the beginning of the next
Yeah.
session before we head
Perfect.
into the second
Yeah.
chakra. And I'm so sorry, Kevin. I forgot, you guys, there is a little ticker tape that I usually have when Kevin comes on the show, and it looks like this. So this is where you
Excellent.
can reach Kevin. It's snowwellness.com, two W's, one at the end of snow and one at the beginning of wellness. And snowwellness.com. Look at that.
It's new, right? Very
So,
cool, right?
if you have any questions for Kevin, you want to email him, if you want to book a session with him, if you want to join the Wednesday classes he just mentioned, that's how you get a hold of him. Snowwellness.com. I
Awesome.
email him there all the time, and you can too.
That's
Well,
fantastic.
thank you again to all the elementals and all
Yes.
the spirit guides that were here. And thank you, Kevin, once again for showing up. It's
Absolutely.
always fun to hang out with you and learn from you.
Always.
And I look forward to doing this again in 1 week.
Me too.
Well,
I'm looking
yeah,
forward to
a
it.
week from
Oh,
a week from. Oh wait,
well,
sorry, not 1 week, one
yeah,
month.
1 month.
Because
February.
we're gonna do
Yeah.
it the first week of it. Sorry to confuse you guys. I do
Yeah.
this live stream once a week, but Kevin
Okay.
and I are gonna do this the first Sunday of every month. So I look forward to
Excellent.
coming back here with Kevin the first Sunday in February. Uh,
That will be awesome. I will look
um,
forward to it.
I'm going to end this live stream. Is there any way you can stay on with me for a second at afterwards?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I just don't like it's kind of like hanging up on somebody, I don't like to do that. I like to say goodbye first.
It's really true.
Okay.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yes. Goodbye,
Blessings.
everybody.